Got us a 2010 Ford F-150 that we're going to put a 2-inch leveling kit on. And let me show you the leveling kit that we're going with. It's the Motofab, very nice, solid aluminum. Basically a spacer that goes in the top of the strut. And be aware that these are not a 1-to-1 ratio. So this is a 2-inch. Sometimes they'll actually stamp it on the side or on the body somewhere. This one's not, but it gives a 2-inch lift in the front. So I've already done this side. So I was going to show you what I have found to be the easiest way to do it. So let's get the camera set up here. Try to get you the best view I can. So the first thing I like to do is just kind of soak down all the threads, which we're going to do we're going to soak down the ball joint, upper ball joint, tie rod, and I'm going to show you the easiest way to do the sway bar. Don't try to take that nut off. We're going to have to lower the sway bar to get the lower control arm to go down far enough. But if you try to break this free, you're going to have to back it up right here. And you're going to have to hand spin this off. You're not going to like doing that. That's going to be a pain. I'm going to show you how easy it is to not have to do that and get what you need. So one of the first things that we're going to need to do is pull this cap off. You can use a screwdriver or a punch and get in behind that little lip, but I found that if you just kind of squeeze on it, the top and bottom, just kind of rotate your grip. It'll eventually work its way off there. Now I found that these are actually 1/2 inch fits these the best. So take you a 1/2 inch socket. When you put these back on, make sure that you do that by hand. You don't want to bear down on that with an impact. You can see the bearing back in there. You don't want to cinch that up real tight. So at this point, while everything's still bolted up, what I like to do is we got to pop all this stuff loose. You can use a screwdriver. I'm going to use this little tool here to get in behind here. I go ahead and pop it loose right here too, just so that's loose. You're going to need a 10mm and an 8mm. And the 8mm for the ABS sensor line. Now all this stuff, I have plenty of slack whenever this knuckle drops down you're not going to be pulling brake lines and stuff loose. It's also, you can go ahead and disconnect the integrated wheel end vacuum lines. I'll tell you what, it's okay, been waiting for that compressor to shut off. Also, make sure whenever you get this out, make sure that this will push, just by hand. This one I've already pushed it in a little bit to make sure that it's gonna. Okay, my GoPro locked up, so I don't know if the file's gonna be recoverable or not. Luckily, we just got started. I popped this cap off, pulled the nut off, and I've taken these lines all loose here, 10mm and 8mm, and I've disconnected the vacuum lines for the integrated wheel end for the 4-wheel drive, and I'm about to take the tie rod loose. Was what I was about to do. And same size nut, so we may as well pop the upper ball joint loose. Okay. Try to get you set up here so that you can see me wailing on the. Let me get that phone. Okay, so once you get the nut off, if you strike it right here with a hammer, it'll generally pop loose. And what I do, if you've got the threads that are much bigger than the very tip of the shaft, you can hit it here a few times. If it doesn't pop loose, you can hit it right on the bottom, and you shouldn't have to hit it hard enough to mess any of that up. You can see that the bottom of that's still perfectly fine. Okay, what's next? At this point, I guess what I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and knock the upper ball joint loose. And you just want to make sure that everything's free. And this thing's going to lay over. And on this one, shouldn't have took that nut completely off yet. Put your nut on, because I don't know how far this is going to want to drop down. Oh, that was easy. Try to wiggle your half shaft out just to be on the safe side. All right. So you can see the shaft is sitting there free and loose. Just make sure it doesn't bind up. We've got plenty of slack in all of our lines. Caliper's still on. I don't take the caliper off. Next step, let's go ahead and take this bottom bolt out here for the strut. And what I'm using is a 30mm for the big nut. And then, where'd my ratchet go? I just grabbed this 1/16" because it fits just perfect right here. I'm sure this actually probably metric, but 1/16" is what I grabbed, and it fits it perfect. At this point, where I'm going to go ahead and take these 3 upper nuts off. And what I'm going to use is a ratchet, air ratchet rather. Go ahead and grab those nuts. One more in the back. You got 3. Don't take that center one off, whatever you do. Yeah, let me put the camera down for a second. Now, here's a tip. Don't try to take this nut loose. You've got to back it up with a wrench. This whole shaft from this point here will just spin on you. So you'd have to wrench this off by hand. An easier way to do it is to just loosen those stabilizer bar nuts off. And I'll show you the difference it makes. I'm going to aim the camera right here so that you can see, make sure everything's loose so it doesn't bind up, so you can see how much farther the control arm's going to drop down whenever I just loosen. I'm not even going to take them all the way off. I'm going to run them down to the end of their threaded portion. So you see what I do, and that's only on this side. That other side's still tight. So whenever I'm ready, I'll just zip those right back up there, and the sway bar will be all back again. Make sure everything's still loose and not bound up. You see how much space we got here to get the strut out. So that's the next step. Strut is out. Okay, let me get the spacer and then we're going to get it bolted on here. Okay, so here's the spacer. Both of them are identical for both sides. First thing you got to do is you got to thread these in here. And run them all the way down. They don't have to be super tight. So this is going to be the top part of the strut where the original strut nuts bolt up. So now okay, how do I want to show you this part? Now this is the way the strut came out. Two nuts on the back, one on the front. You know, or the one stud facing forward. These two back. Now this will only go on one way. Okay, so I'm going to lay it right down on top of the strut. Take the nuts that came with the spacer kit. And let's see, I'm not sure what size those are. Probably this size right here. And let me get the phone. Okay, so I'm just going to tighten these nuts up right here. Okay, so now the top of the strut is done, the spacer's put on. Now, what you got to do is rotate the strut 180 degrees when you go back into it from where it was, because see the original bolt pattern is 180 opposite. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that's all coming through. And what you want to do is go up with it and then put the lower part of the strut in. And what I like to do is have a strut nut handy. That way when you get the first bolt in, you can put a nut on it. And it will hold it to where you don't have to sit there and fight with it. So right now, all I got to do is pry down a little bit and get that in. Okay. I'm just putting the nuts on the top by hand right now. And then what we're going to do now is put this bottom bolt in. Hopefully you can see that. They tell you to put a jack underneath it and lift it up, but Usually you can just put a little pressure on it by hand. I just grabbed underneath the strut, not the strut, but the control arm, and lifted it up. Okay. Wrong size. Okay. I want to kind of get you out a little bit so that you can get a view of everything that's going on here, because you want to make sure that you don't bind up the half shaft. Meaning you want to make sure that this is always free and loose as you're putting all this back up here. Rotate and wiggle this until you see the threads come through the hub. Okay. So you see the threads are through. Get your pry bar. Lay that gently off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and get this floor jack and lift up on it a little bit. Okay, so here's kind of the biggest pain of this whole job, and that's getting this upper ball joint back in the knuckle. And so what I've got my nut ready to go on there. I've got 2 pry bars. That one I'm gonna walk the upper control arm down. Once I get the ball joint going through the hole, we should be home free. So what I mean, I'm going to hold this up. I'm going to go ahead and throw the tie rod in there just to help me hold it. make sure everything spins. So now, before I tighten up the ball joint and everything, I'm gonna go ahead and tighten up the sway bar. Helps when you go the right direction. Okay, oh, last but not least, this nut here. It's a good idea to not impact it on. I always do it by hand. Okay. Then it's a good idea to overlook everything. Got the top bolts tight, ball joint. All the lines are hooked back up. Integrated wheel in, vacuum hoses, tie rod, and then you just want to make sure that everything spins free. And I like to go ahead and just hook a vacuum line up, pull a vacuum on the integrated wheel in, make sure it disengages. So right now you see the axle shaft's not turning because the hub is disengaged. The hub is disengaged by vacuum. So when you pull a vacuum, disengages. I pulled the vacuum off. It is now should be engaged, and you can see the axle is now turning. So the integrated wheel end is working. And that's it. So this job's done. Let me get the wheels put back on, and we'll see how much higher it was. It was at 38 inches. I should have showed that before I even started. But with the front of the truck setting, it was 38 inches from the edge of the wheel well here to the ground. So we're going to put the wheels on it and see if it actually brought it up 2 inches like we're hoping. Okay, I don't know if you can see that because of the sun, but we're about to measure. From the ground up, we got about 40 1/4. And we're sitting at probably about 40 1/8 here. Check the other side. This side we're a little over 40 1/4. Here we're about just under 40 1/2. All in all, I think it looks pretty good. So we definitely got 2 inches out of that kit. So anyway, again, this is a 2010 F-150. It's the FX4, but it should be pretty much the same on any F-150 of this style. You guys take care.